Energy Laboratory, and welcome to today's webinar, which is being hosted by the Clean Energy Solutions Center and also the Global Buildings Performance Network. And today's webinar is focused on the frontrunners in energy renovation policies and what can we learn from them. And one important note of mention before we begin our presentations is that the Clean Energy Solutions Center does not endorse or recommend specific products or services. Information provided in this webinar is featured in the Solutions Center's resource library as one of many best practices, resources reviewed and selected by technical experts. Now, before we begin, I just want to go over some of the webinar features. For audio, you have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over your telephone. And if you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane. Doing so will just eliminate the possibility of feedback and echo. And if you choose to dial in by phone, please select the telephone option, and a box on the right side will display the telephone number and audio pin that you should use to dial in. And panelists, we ask that you please mute your audio device while you are not presenting. And if anyone is having technical difficulties with the webinar, you may contact the GoToWebinars help desk at the number at the bottom of that slide, which is 888-259-3826. Now, we encourage anyone from the audience to ask questions at any point during the webinar. To do so, you may type your question into the question pane and submit it there, and I'll present those questions to the panelists at the end of the webinar during the question and answer session. And if anyone's having difficulty viewing the material through the webinar portal, you will find PDF copies of the presentations at cleanenergysolutions.org/training, and you can follow along as our speakers present. Also, an audio recording of the presentations will be posted to that site within about a week of this broadcast. And the GBPN will also be providing a live tweet of today's webinar, and attendees can use the hashtag Global Buildings to follow the live tweet and also participate in that. Now, today's webinar agenda is centered around the presentations from our guest panelists, Lausten, Sophie Schnapp, Lindsey Robbins, and Connie Peterson. And these expert panelists have been kind enough to join us to provide insights into how to introduce and to develop a best practice policy package that contributes to realizing a reduction in energy consumption of the residential building stock, what factors are significant in driving change, and what the market conditions and technical developments are behind best practice renovation policy packages. So before our speakers begin their presentations, I just want to provide a short informative overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center initiative. And then following the presentations, we'll have a question and answer session where the panelists will address questions submitted by the audience, closing remarks, and then a brief survey. Now, this slide provides a bit of background in terms of how the Solutions Center came to be formed. And the Solutions Center is an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial and is supported through a partnership with UN Energy. It was launched in April of 2011 and is primarily led by Australia, the United States, and other CEM partners. Outcomes of this unique partnership include support of developing countries through enhancement of resources on policies relating to energy access, no-cost expert policy assistance, and peer-to-peer learning and training tools, such as the webinar you're attending today. And there's four primary goals for the Solutions Center. First goal is to serve as a clearinghouse of clean energy policy resources. Second is to serve to share policy best practices, data, and analysis tools specific to clean energy policies and programs. Third, the Solutions Center strives to deliver dynamic services that enable expert assistance, learning, and peer-to-peer sharing of experiences. And then lastly, the center fosters dialogue on emerging policy issues and innovation from around the globe. Now, our primary audience is energy policymakers and analysts from governments and technical organizations in all countries, but the Solutions Center also strives to engage with the private sector, NGOs, and civil society. Now, one of the marquee features that the Solutions Center is happy to provide is the ASPEN Expert, which is a valuable service that has established a broad team of over 30 experts from around the globe who are all available to provide remote policy advice and analysis to all countries at no cost. So for example, in the area of, hold on, sorry, getting some feedback. And so, for example, in the area of buildings, we are very pleased to have Cesar Trevino, leader with the Mexico Green Building Council, serving as our expert. So if you have a need for policy assistance in buildings or any other clean energy sector, we do encourage you to use this useful service. Again, it is provided free of charge. So to submit a request, simply fill out the form at the Ask an Expert feature at cleanenergysolutions.org/expert. We also invite you to spread the word about this service to those in your networks and organizations. So in summary, we encourage you to explore and take advantage of the Solution Center resources and services, including the Expert Policy Assistance, the database of clean energy policy resources, subscribe to our newsletter, and participate in webinars like this. And so now I'd like to provide brief introductions for our distinguished panelists today. First up, our first speaker is Jens Lausten, a senior policy expert and advisor at the Global Buildings Performance Network. And then following Jens, we will hear from Sophie Schnapp, a policy analyst at the Global Buildings Performance Network. And then following Sophie, we will hear from Lindsey Robbins, who is a senior project manager at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, where she manages phase 1 of the Cleaner, Greener Communities programs. And then our final speaker today is Mr. Connie Peterson, who is president of Swedisol, the Swedish trade organization for the leading insulation companies. And so with those introductions, please join me in welcoming Jens Lausten to today's webinar.
Thank you. May I get my slides on? I'm here to welcome everybody and do a very small introduction to the webinar, but I'm not one of the important speakers here. I'm just introducing. Next slide, please. First, a few words about the Global Buildings Performance Network. Some of you might know us from one of the previous webinars we held, but we are a global network having a global agenda, trying to put buildings on the global agenda, but also having a regional presence in India, China, in Europe, and in US, where we work together with different organizations. And we are starting up new activities in India, no, in Southeast Asia. And we try to develop recommendations for policies, show what policies are working, and develop information about best practices and potentials and more. Next slide, please. We have, can I have the next slide? We have looked into the climate change issues, and we have done studies on what are the potentials, what are the possible scenarios for the future. And we have, as it's shown down in the right corners, looked at what would happen if we have a frozen policy scenario. If we don't do anything more, we would have an immense increase in energy consumption in the building sector because of the growth, in particular in the emerging economies. Then the second part, we have looked at what would happen in case we implement the current policies, but we implement them the best possible way, and we do them more ambitious than we do today. That would be the blue scenario, which is still giving us an increase in the energy consumption. Finally, we looked into what would happen if we implement best practice around the world and try really to do a step change or a totally transformation of the market for energy efficiency. And only in that case it would be possible for us to get a reduction from the building sector. Next slide, please. The deep scenario, as we call the scenario where we go for implementing the best practices, is meaning that we are upscaling the development of state-of-the-art buildings and policies so that we can follow this path. And we need to implement that very fast. That means all countries need to move quickly and implement such kind of policies within the next 10 years. Next slide, please. This slide is just illustrating what we are trying to achieve. There is a lot of policies which can help in developing that what is today the best of the market to become the 100% of the market or the major part of the market. If you click one more time, it will show that this is normally taking like 20 years when we have seen before, and one more click, and we want actually that people do this in only 10 years. So it's a very ambitious framework we have. When we look at the emerging economies, it's highly new construction, which is important. But if we look at the developed part of the world, and in particular Europe and US, it's renovation that is needing to take place. And it's deep renovation, and it's more of a renovation. And therefore, we have worked on developing this new tool, which have been led by Sophie Schnapp. We'll give you more details on the tool itself. And I would leave the floor to her to introduce you to this new tool. These are just some of our reports, but next, that's fine. Sophie, will you take over here?
Hello there. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are in the world, and thanks for your attendance. My name is Sophie Schnapp, and I'm a policy analyst at the Global Building Performance Network. And I'm the person in charge of the development of our existing building projects. So firstly, I want to provide you with a bit of a background to the GBPN sort of existing building research project on more and deeper renovation. Basically, our fundamental goal here is upscaling deep renovation, as Jens Lausten mentioned earlier. So last year we published a report that's called "What is a Deep Renovation?" We found deep renovation to be quite a popular buzzword in the community at the moment, and we felt that there was a real need to harmonize this and define it. So we looked at the differences in regions in the EU and the US, and using a sort of consensus-seeking process with a group of experts in the field of renovation, we came up with a final definition, or a few final definitions, for a deep renovation or a deep retrofit. So the next part of our project, or overall research project, was we then moved on to define a set of state-of-the-art criteria for a policy package that targets energy renovations. This feeds into the new policy tool for renovation that we published this March. And with the findings of this tool, we present to you the webinar series that we're involved in right now today on how to save energy using renovation policy measures. That aims really to take a deeper dive into how to set up a best practice policy package using insight from best practice jurisdictions. So now I'm just going to give you a quick overview of my presentation. I'm going to initially discuss the rationale behind the webinar series. I'd then like to talk about the policy comparative tool, the methodology behind it, and basically the results.
Sorry to interrupt real quick, but your audio is coming through a lot more staticky than it was earlier. Is it possible to change something? Either I know you have another computer there. Maybe we should look at that one.
Yeah, give us a second. We're just going to try something. Maybe if I speak into some headphones, it might work better. Can you let me know if this sounds any clearer?
That's 100% better.
Oh, well, then that's perfect. We shall continue. Okay, I just need to retrack where I was. Okay, overview. So, yeah, I'm going to discuss the sort of the tool that is really what has allowed us to introduce this webinar series. And then I'm going to talk about the sort of subject matter of the webinar, which is an overall performance, how the sort of success stories of two frontrunners in energy renovation policy. And finally, I'm just going to conclude by introducing the topics of the up and coming webinars. So why have we decided to host a series of webinars? What we really want to do with this webinar series is to provide you, the viewers and policymakers, hopefully, with some in-depth insight into how a jurisdiction used a specific policy measure or combined measures to renovate their building stock. So experts from best practice jurisdictions have been invited and will be invited to present their knowledge and insight as to how the policy measures that were adopted in their regions was successful in reducing consumption in residential buildings. The webinar series will provide insight into the challenges and opportunities that the best practice jurisdictions have faced during the implementation of policy measures, and hopefully outline key factors and lessons learned that are significant in driving this change that we want to see. The webinar should provide people with a platform or a platform for jurisdictions to learn from the practices of others. So I'm going to discuss our tool a little bit that we've just promoted. Taking it back a few years, in 2012, the GBPN developed a methodology for defining best practice building codes, which targets new buildings. So now in 2014, we're moving on, and we want to add to this collection of tools that the GBPN have. And so now we've set up a set of criteria that will be used to define and support the uptake of state-of-the-art renovation policies. This tool that we have identifies key themes and elements that support the development of policy packages, and it also analyzes and compares best practice policy packages based on the themes and elements identified. So I'm going to discuss the criteria with you of how we came about deciding or finally coming to a consensus on these state-of-the-art criteria. Okay, well, you can see the final criteria at the top of the slide there, and to basically come up with this, a consensus process was encountered or established to develop supporting criteria and sub-questions that could be used as a tool to determine whether a renovation policy package contained best practice elements. So we used an expert committee to help us here, a group of 30 experts who know about renovation policy and have been working with renovation policy for their lives almost. So that was what really gave this criteria the stamp of approval that it required. So the final criteria that we came up with, we have 6 themes along the top row there. You can see regulatory measures, building assessment, financial instruments, economic instruments, capacity building, and overall performance. And then under these, we have 14 sub-criteria that form the basis of the state-of-the-art renovation criteria. The methodology really used to develop the criteria included a desktop study of current literature, expert input, peer review, and a peer review process. And then we also had to find a methodology to identify best practice jurisdictions. And for a region or jurisdiction to be accepted to be deemed as a best practice region and to be selected by the GBPN to be analyzed, it must have met a series of criteria. Firstly, the jurisdiction must have already have, of course, an active policy package supporting the uptake of renovations and hopefully aspects of energy or deeper renovations within this policy package. And secondly, the jurisdiction must have significantly reduced the energy consumption of their residential building stock. This was a bit of a tricky part as well. So initially we ran a literature review process of current best practice renovation policy. We then ran this past our experts for the first round of selection, and then we looked into the consumption data of all the different states in the US and all of the different countries in the EU, and finally narrowed it down to 6 regions in the US and 6 states in the US and 6 countries in the EU. So I'm going to go over some of the key findings from our tool. Firstly, energy renovation policy is really an emerging field, and we found, along with our scoring committee and experts, that there is still scope for further progress. We're only touching the sort of the base of what we could be doing at the moment. Secondly, a holistic policy package must be in place, and it must address many aspects of a renovation process. Thirdly, this is quite a big one, that there is really no such thing as an overall best policy package, and all countries and states can benefit from best practice sharing, which is what we're trying to do today. Financial mechanisms need to be locally adapted and linked to broader national renovation strategies. We found that many of the best practice regions lack a presence of short-term implementation plans or roadmaps to lead the way to realizing their targets. Also, although there are many national targets for renovations, national targets for reduction of energy or reduction of carbon dioxide emissions, there really is an absence of clear and ambitious targets for the renovation of existing buildings or generally buildings themselves. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly discuss this first webinar. I think we've already gone over it quite a bit. So we've invited jurisdictions who have successfully reduced their residential consumption to present their own specific success story. We believe at the GBPN that the overall performance of a policy package is quite critical when analyzing whether the package can be defined as having best practice elements. Although most of the best practice jurisdictions have actually managed to reduce their consumption indicators, there have been two real golden stars that have the steepest and greatest reduction that were found in the past 10 years. And this is New York and Sweden. So a little applause to them, really. For this, I'm really proud to present Lindsey Robbins from the New York State Energy Research and Development Center and Connie Peterson from Sweden. They're going to provide us with some insight into how these two jurisdictions have successfully reduced the energy consumption of their households in the past 10 years. Finally, just a quick overview of the webinar series in general. This is the first webinar, and thank you all for being present. We're talking basically about the two front runners who have successfully reduced their energy the most. Our second webinar is going to be held at the beginning of June and is going to be looking at energy saving targets, whether it's overall national or building and renovation related. The third webinar is going to be held around the beginning of July, opened by a special guest that we won't name yet. And we'll look into how labeling and certification schemes lead to energy reductions and if they need to be linked to a package of measures. And the fourth webinar will be held after the summer, which is quite a topic for everybody to be discussing at the moment, is how can we finance energy renovations. So we're going to take some insight from best practice jurisdictions on how they've managed to go about doing this. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're located in the world. So my name is Lindsey Robbins, and I'm with an organization called NYSERDA in New York State, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to be here today to talk to you about some of the successes that we've had with implementing clean energy in the residential sector. So for those of you that don't know, NYSERDA stands for the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Most people in New York State don't even know what it stands for. It's a very long name. We really stick with NYSERDA because that's easier to remember. But basically what we are is a public benefit corporation. It was established back in 1975. However, we essentially operate like a state agency. For the first couple of decades that we were around, really from 1975 up until the mid-90s, the majority of what we did was what our name says, research and development. And while we've continued to do that since the mid-90s, really since then the majority of our staff and budget and responsibility has been focused on running the state's clean energy programs. And really we run programs that address all sectors, commercial, industrial, agriculture. But what we're going to talk about today is mainly focusing on the programs that impact the residential sector, including everything from single-family homes all the way up to very large apartment complexes. So this is our mission statement, and as you can see, we really are focused on both improving the state's economy and its environment, focusing mainly on innovative solutions related to energy in order to accomplish that. But we are far from being the only organization in New York State that is working towards that mission. I think that, it's definitely a big asset to New York State to have an organization like NYSERDA. There are only a few other states in the United States that do have an entity like us that's really focused specifically on these issues and has a mission dedicated to them. But the real key to the success that New York State has achieved is the fact that all of the entities that you see here are actively collaborating on energy-related issues in the state. We have our Public Service Commission that regulates the electric and gas utilities. They collect ratepayer surcharges that fund the clean energy deployment programs. They also have a staff that works collaboratively with both NYSERDA and the utilities to design and run those programs. We have our governor's office that sets the state's policy agenda, sets goals and targets for energy and renewables, and also launches special initiatives that address current issues with energy in the state. We have the state legislature that can establish programs or initiatives via legislation. We have municipal and investor-owned utilities that collect ratepayer surcharges and work with NYSERDA to collectively administer clean energy programs. We have other New York State government departments that we actively collaborate with, and in some cases co-run programs and policy initiatives with. And in New York State, we actually have 1,600 different municipal governments in the state, all of which have the ability to implement policies and programs and possible policies on their own. One of those, of course, is New York City, who is no small player globally or in the United States, especially when it comes to sustainability policies. And then, of course, there are many community benefit organizations and non-governmental advocacy organizations that we collaborate with on policy, outreach, and program-related matters. So I was really delighted to hear from GBPN a few weeks ago about the fact that New York State had performed so well in the study that they did, and to really have the opportunity to kind of think about, what it really is that has led to New York State's success. It was kind of neat to have the opportunity to think about it from that perspective and pulling together this presentation. And these are kind of the key factors that I came up with that I really think contribute to the success that we've had in the residential sector. I'm going to walk through each of these in more detail, but in a nutshell, I really think the strengths that we have are, one, the fact that we have a relatively long history of running clean energy deployment programs. And as a state, we've harnessed a lot of funding to support those programs over the years. Two, the fact that we've had the opportunity to shape a lot of what has happened on the national scale by being the first to try out and implement some of the innovative residential-related programs and policies that have gone on in the United States. Three, the consistent political support that we've had from the top down, from our current governor, Andrew Cuomo, and governors in the past, also the legislature, our mayors, and municipal governments, all of which have set some ambitious clean energy goals and helped the state to harness the necessary resources in order to achieve them. Four, the fact that we've placed a great deal of emphasis on the importance of bottom-up solutions and strategies that are engaging people on the community level, so that we're really coming at this from both sides, both with top-down policies and bottom-up engagement and solutions, that I think is especially important on the residential sector. And finally, I think the key factor to our success is the focus that we've consistently had, both with policies and programs, on market transformation. So not just incentivizing good behavior or mandating it, but really helping the market to adapt to deliver effective solutions on its own. So starting off with funding and experience, we've really been lucky enough in New York State to have 16 years of experience running ratepayer-funded clean energy programs. It can really take a while to get these programs right, and even after 16 years, we're certainly still working to make them even better. But essentially practice makes perfect, and we've had a lot of time to learn over the years what works and what doesn't in administering these programs. Another key factor is what I talked about before, the fact that the state, as a state, we've been working together for years across departments, across municipal governments, with utilities and nonprofits and many other partners to design policies and programs that work and to take advantage of the multitude of know-how and resources in both the government, nonprofit, and the private sector. And we've also been fortunate enough to be able to harness a lot of funding to support our clean energy work, and not just federal funds, but funds that come from the state itself, from ratepayer surcharges and from our participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So to give you a little bit better of an idea of how funding programs and some policy initiatives have unfolded over time, I pulled together this timeline. This by no means shows all of the key events in energy in New York State, but just a few important ones that I wanted to highlight. In 1996, New York State deregulated its utility markets, meaning that utilities were no longer responsible for generating electricity or gas, but rather focused instead on the distribution of those resources. And at the same time that that happened, the state government and the Public Service Commission thought that it was important to create some programs that would ensure good stewardship of our energy resources. And so they instituted the first ratepayer surcharge at that time to fund programs that would transform the marketplace, encourage energy efficiency, and keep energy affordable for low-income households in New York State. And that was really the beginning of the SBC, or the Systems Benefit Charge funding stream and programs, which, as you can see from the bottom of the timeline, are still running in their fourth iteration today. So the state, when they started this, needed someone to fund those programs. NYSERDA had been around at that point for a couple of decades doing R&D and also, state energy planning and research and development, and we seemed like a good candidate to do this. So they gave the primary responsibility for designing and administering those programs to NYSERDA, and we've been the primary person running those programs in the state ever since. Going a little bit farther down, in 2004, the Public Service Commission instituted another portfolio standard, this time to support renewables specifically, both on the commercial scale and on the customer-focused scale. We refer to that funding stream as the Renewable Portfolio Standard. And then in 2008, another portfolio standard was put in to support specific electric and gas saving goals that the state had set for itself, and that one was called the Energy Efficiency Portfolio Standard, or EAPS, which funds programs that acquire electric and gas savings to meet our state targets. And that same year, New York State began its participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which brought a new type of funding to the table. So for those of you that don't know, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or we refer to it as RGGI, was the first mandatory cap-and-trade program in North America. It involves 9 different states, each of which use the proceeds from carbon auctions that occur in the states to fund different types of programs and clean energy initiatives. And that's a great non-ratepayer funding source. So we have funding clean energy programs in New York State. That's great because it is a little bit more flexible than an average ratepayer source. So moving on to kind of the next point of leadership and innovation, some of the pluses to having a diverse set of program funding sources and starting early in the program game was that we got the opportunity to really be a part of creating some of the program standards and training certifications that are now used nationally in the United States in the residential marketplace. The Home Performance with Energy Star program, which provides standards and guidelines and supports the work necessary to improve the energy performance of existing homes, is now used throughout the country, but was initially piloted and developed in New York State. We were the first to implement the program, and so we've really been fortunate and had a longer time to learn what works and what doesn't in running it in our state, which definitely gives us an advantage, and of course has given us more years to acquire savings from that program. Same with the Energy Star certification for new construction multifamily high-rise buildings, which is based off of a pilot program designed and run by NYSERDA. The first 4 buildings in the country to receive that label were built here, and really because we've been doing this for a long time, a large majority of the Energy Star labeled multifamily buildings in the country are still located in New York State. And in order to serve all of these innovative residential programs that we've been running since back in 1996, we really needed a qualified workforce. And so we also had the opportunity to work very early on with an organization called the Building Performance Institute to develop certifications and trainings for residential energy professionals that were really based and developed here and are used nationally today. So we've also had the chance in New York State via New York City to enact some of the most innovative legislation, which is one of the best known examples of which is New York City's Greener Greater Buildings Plan, which addressed all of New York City's large buildings, which are defined as those that are over 50,000 square feet. So that included Sorry, I think we've had a few technical difficulties. I think I'm back on now. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to keep going. So the Greener Greater Buildings Plan addressed all large buildings in New York City, which are defined as those that are 50,000 square feet or larger. That includes commercial buildings, but the majority of those buildings are actually multifamily residential buildings. 75% of the buildings that were impacted by this legislation were residential buildings. And one of the key factors from this legislation was that it mandated annual benchmarking plus energy audits every 10 years for those buildings, and also enacted stricter energy code requirements and some workforce development policies. Even though this is a New York City-led initiative, it's also another great example of how the whole state kind of works together and why New York State has been successful. NYSERDA and many other state partners collaborated with New York City to support the legislation with technical resources, funding for training, and New York City has really worked to use the legislation to drive people into participating in state-funded and run clean energy programs. So it's really been something that's served both sides. So another key factor in the success that we've had is really the great political support that we've had, from the top down in the state. We've had tremendous leadership from our current governor, Andrew Cuomo, and from previous governors as well. As I mentioned before, we have a robust network of state and municipal governments, agencies, regulators, all collaborating together to implement some of these policies and programs. Clearly, our participation, the state's decision to participate in RGGI has brought a lot of different great resources to the state that we can use to run these programs. And one of the really great things that we have that happens in New York State is state energy planning. So really, developing comprehensive state energy plans to think strategically about how we want to use energy and how we want to promote clean energy going forward. We developed our first state energy plan back in 2002. We updated that in 2009 and are currently in the process of updating another one for 2014. And that kind of leadership has really been a key factor in success. So the Green Jobs, Green New York program is something that I want to talk about as an example of a successful kind of community-based strategy. It's a great example of how we've tackled issues both from the top down and the bottom up. Green Jobs, Green New York is a RGGI-funded, NYSERDA-run program. It was originally mandated by the New York State Legislature, and it focuses on providing technical assistance and financing for residential buildings and small businesses that want to invest in energy efficiency improvements, and it also supports the training of service providers. But even though this program was mandated by the legislature and is run by NYSERDA, which is a statewide organization, I think one of the keys to its success was the fact that we really took a community-based outreach strategy that put a large amount of the responsibility for finding participants, conducting outreach, and helping participants to navigate the program. It really put a lot of that responsibility with strategically selected community-based organizations around the state that had really strong ties to their communities and could tailor their outreach strategy to the specific needs of their constituents. And I think that led in large part to the success of the program. Another example of a top-down program that we succeeded, that had a lot of success from engaging people from the bottom up, is our Cleaner, Greener Communities program. This program was enacted by Governor Cuomo in 2011, really with the idea of empowering the 10 different regions in New York State to help them develop sustainability plans and then to implement projects from those plans to ensure that we're actively working to improve the sustainability of our communities throughout New York State. We're the first state in the country to create comprehensive regional sustainability plans for the entire state. And I think this was a really tremendous effort. Creating these plans really happened on the community scale in each of these regions, involving hundreds of different municipalities and thousands of active participants, of real citizens on the ground that sat on working groups and contributed to the development of these plans and now feel invested in their communities and in working towards sustainability. And I think that was a real tremendous success of the program. So the final point I wanted to touch on was really the idea of market transformation and the key role that plays in programs that we've run in New York State. What you see here is something called the energy innovation chain. This is something that NYSERDA uses kind of internally to make sure that we're approaching our program design in the right way, so that we're really taking new energy efficiency strategies or technologies and kind of bringing them all the way through with strategic interventions along the way to take them from the point where they're new and get them developed and get them out into the marketplace. And so this is something that we really think about is, taking something and helping it evolve throughout the full process to the point where it can really stand on its own and become a standard practice in the marketplace that doesn't need incentives or other types of things to support it. So one of the things that we do when it comes to market transformation that we've really focused on, especially in the residential sector for both multifamily and homes, is creating an educated workforce and market mechanisms for delivering clean energy systems, for delivering clean energy services. As I mentioned before, we've placed a lot of emphasis on training. We've put a lot of funding into training. Really on the multifamily side, we've also put a lot of time and effort into developing consulting firms and people who are really out there delivering this service to building owners, helping to support their business development, helping to support their training, and really ensuring that as a state we have a robust network of service providers who can provide these services, and that we're not just having those people be available, but actually helping them develop their business plans so that ideally in the future they don't need to rely on incentive programs in order to get customers, so that they can show customers the value they can bring to the table just on their own as a service that can help people save money and save energy. Another thing that we do is really actively utilizing information from the programs that we run in order to inform the marketplace. One of the things that we've done on the multifamily side is we have one of the few programs that actually measures energy use before and after renovation, so that we can really see if the savings that projects are predicting they're going to get with energy models, and whether or not they're actually getting those. That's obviously important to customers that are considering participating in the program. It's also important to the finance field and whether or not they're interested in providing capital for these projects, if they really think they're going to save the energy they're predicting they're going to save. So we've used some of that research to try and get it out to the marketplace to provide that information and use that strategically. Another thing we've done is try and find creative strategies to stimulate action in the marketplace that aren't necessarily associated with incentives or even with legislation. One of the things we've done in the state is partnered with New York City for the multifamily sector to run something called the New York City Carbon Challenge for multifamily buildings, which basically, it isn't an incentive-based program. We provide, outreach assistance, but we've gotten at this point, I think 12 of the largest property management firms in New York City to sign up to the challenge and bring in significant chunks of their portfolios of multifamily buildings and make a commitment to reducing energy use, carbon emissions in those buildings by 30% over the next 10 years. So that's really, using the idea of the competitiveness in the marketplace to really kind of stimulate people to say, I'm going to step up and make this commitment and do this work. In the multifamily sector, we've also really tried to stimulate participation in our programs and people reaching out to the certified consultants that we have in our network. We created things like Google Maps that show how many people have participated in our program, so that you can go to the map and look and see, oh, there's 5 different buildings within 2 blocks of me that have participated in this. Maybe this is something I should be paying attention to in order to have a competitive, residential business that I can continue to make sure that my buildings are competitive with others in my neighborhood and in my city. So taking those types of strategies to stimulate activity without incentives. Finally, really focusing on connecting clean, excuse me, on making connections with, economic development and finance. One of the things that Governor Cuomo has done is created these 10 regions throughout the state, which each have regional economic development councils and are really focused on improving the economy of New York State. And when we ran our Cleaner, Greener Communities program, we were able to connect the sustainability plans that were developed for these regions with their economic development strategies to really have this be something that people felt invested in because they knew it was going to not only improve the sustainability of their communities, but also the economy of them, which for large parts of upstate New York especially, has been suffering for many years. Another strategy that we've taken is increasing the availability of capital for clean energy projects. We launched as a state, as a city, several years ago, the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, which has been focused on developing innovative financing packages to assist buildings, both commercial and residential in New York City, with getting capital to do energy efficiency projects. And recently, as a state, we've launched a $1 billion initiative to launch a statewide green bank, which is going to try and make innovative steps in the financing industry in order to make more financing available for clean energy projects. So taking that approach as well, I think, has led a lot to our success. And that's it for my presentation. Are we holding questions until the end?
Yes, we're going to hold questions till the end. Right now, we're going to switch over to Mr. Connie Peterson for his presentation, and we do have his slide deck up right now.
Yeah.
Hi, Connie.
Hi. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, good. Yes, then I start. My name is Connie Peterson, and I'm invited to this seminar to talk about Sweden and how we have been able to save energy in renovation through our political decisions. And I'm sure glad that we are considered as a front runner, but I'm also a little bit surprised because I think we could do things much better. But I'm happy to share our experience with you. So can I have the next slide? My presentation will include the historical and political context relating to the renovation work. I will also try to explain the key factors that were significant in Sweden in driving change and how we in Sweden could reduce our consumption of energy and the market conditions, and also explain a little bit of the renovation story in Sweden. And I will also show you 2 examples from renovation that's been done in Sweden. Can I have the next slide? Sweden has adopted policies focusing on the environment since the 1960s. So it has a history in Sweden. And another thing that's a little bit special for us up in the northern part of Europe is we have a cold climate. We are forced to build more efficient buildings. It's needed to have better building envelope than many other countries have to have. Another thing that's a little bit different for us is that we have hydro and nuclear power production, and we use a lot of biomass fuel. With all of these have low emissions of greenhouse gases. So there is not so much greenhouse gases produced from heating of the buildings, but still about 15% of the total greenhouse gases are from use of energy in our buildings. And we also have quite ambitious country reduction targets for the climate and energy. We have a zero energy net greenhouse gas emissions as a target for 2050. And we have in general more ambitious goals than the European Union has for especially for emissions and renewable resources. And we also have some other goals. And one of the most important goals for success in saving energy in our buildings has been a goal of increasing energy efficiency in the buildings, which are trying to reduce the energy consumption by 20% to 2020 and by The building code in Sweden, we have the same requirements for renovation as we have for new building. So it's quite easy to fulfill the requirements in new buildings. And that have resulted in various demands from different actors to achieve better or higher demands on energy consumption. That's not good if you want to have a rational construction business. So that have been noted by the authorities, and we will try to work with the requirements. New one will be presented in June this year, implemented in January next year. The labeling scheme, the EPC. In Sweden, we are having calculated energy performance at the design phase. And then the performance is checked in every new building. And I think this is a little bit different from other countries. And that's good. You win a lot of experience when you do it that way. We also have strict performance and implementation of the EPCs. And a large percentage of the buildings do have labels. But there still are improvements to make on these audits. They are required to provide information on energy saving and how to improve the energy performance in buildings. And that is something we have to be better on in the future, at least in Sweden. We have training and education campaigns. We have a national refurbishment center in Lund. It's operated by the university in Lund and the industry, and it's the first of its kind in the country. And the background for this refurbishment center is we have a huge renovation need of the country's multifamily housing, particularly in the one we have in what we call the Million area. The Million area, or the Million program, was a political-driven project. We had to eliminate shortage of housing in the 60s or 70s. But 1 million apartments / single-family houses were built during 10 years. And we have total of 4.5 million apartments, single-family houses. So this Million program is a big share of the total buildings. And these are now about to be renovated. We have several one-stop solution centers. This new one for Center for Renovation. We have also BEBO, that's a cooperation from multifamily houses, BELOC for commercial buildings, and a new BESMO that's started recently for single-family houses. But there's quite a lot of single-family houses. About we have 4.5 million apartments, single-family houses, and of these 4.5 million, 2 million are single-family houses. Can we take the next slide? And this is the two examples of renovation. The one on the top is a multifamily house. It's Brogården in the southwest of Sweden. It's a big housing area from the Million program that's renovated to good energy performance right now. It's totally 16 buildings that's completely renovated. And it was not just for renovation. They had to be redone. It was, of course, renovation and energy performance, but there also was a need to change the image of this area. And they wanted to have another mix of the sizes of the apartments. They wanted more area that was possible to have for rent. So this case is well known in Sweden, and you can find a lot of information on the internet. And in this case, the residence is 60 houses. So the residents were moved out to an empty house while they are working with one house at the step. And the other example is from single-family houses. As I said, we have about 2 million single-family houses, and 1.5 million of these are built before 1980. And a large proportion of these are in need of renovation and to improve energy efficiency. And 3 companies have developed a Rent Zero concept, renovation for zero energy use, cost-effective renovation for older house. And the house was in its original version, and it was renovated in last year. And in both these cases, they kept the original look of the houses. They looked about the same as they did before. And in the last example, the people were still living in the house during the renovation work. And there was an extension, renovation of the exterior body, the windows, doors, roofs. But there was also installed new ventilation, heating, and energy systems in the house. And you can also find that information on the internet on the rentzero.se. Okay, can we run to the next slide? These are the figures. I think maybe it was this one that Sophie showed us in the beginning. That's the figures for the energy consumption in Sweden. I mean, it's decreasing set to square meter, and also the intensity are falling. I mean, of course, this figure for the housing sector is depending on the weather condition, and therefore they are varying a little bit from year to year. We can have the next slide. Thank you. The building stock we will have, as we have a goal for 2050, almost 70% of the buildings we have by that time is already built. So if we shall achieve the goals we have for the energy use, we must specifically look at the existing house. And today we're renovating about 20 to 30,000 a year, and that's not enough. And especially if you take in consideration that we have the Million program coming into the renovation phase right now, so we have to upgrade the number of renovations. And we also can see that we need incentives to increase the number of renovation and also to get them down. So as the Million program originally was made for getting new housing, we have to make a new Million program for renovation right now. Can I have the next? It's quite costly to make the energy efficiency and renovation work. The lower cost for energy will not cover the expenses for renovation and the work with the energy issues. And single family houses in Sweden are they have generally been maintained, while the need for renovation is especially pronounced in many of the multi-family houses. So when you are making calculation for renovation, you have to include the benefits to the society. And you can see on this slide, there's a lot of benefits for the society. One of them is creation of new jobs during the renovation. You also have to create better, safer, less segregated living environment, and also have to maybe change with a mix with the workplaces and the services. So this is these factors is have to be considered when you start a renovation work. Next slide. The construction sector has earlier been used as a means to increase employment in times of a recession, and that has not been good for the construction companies. But these subsidies have been cut, and that's the favor for the construction industry, and that's fully accepted, and we will like to have it that way. Another thing that affects us is there's a tax reduction for renovation work in Sweden. And that has stimulated, of course, stimulated energy efficiency and renovation, but it was not promoted to promote. It was not invented to promote renovation work. It was to get rid of the black economy, as at least we say so in Sweden. We wanted this job to be done by companies who pay taxes and so on. Another market condition is the collaboration of market parties to deliver renovation solutions. And one of them we have in a low energy building program, Lausten, that shows good examples for the rest of the market. And then next slide. And a little bit about Sweden's renovation story. Why did we succeed, and why did we get such good rating? I think the most important fact is the need to have a plan, to have goals that the market can get around. It has to be pronounced, and that has been really important for us. And we also have a business sector that want to do better. They know they can do much better. They can improve the efficiency in the energy use in the buildings. And it's more the business sector who's driving than the ministries and authorities in Sweden. But that has been important. And that is also important for most of the society. You are taught from the young age, as you said, that these topics are important for you. And we also have good data quality. If you are going somewhere, it's good to know your present position before you are moving. And we have really good information about the condition of our buildings, and we know what to do. And it's also so that most of the buildings are done in about the same way. Both the multi-family houses and the single-family houses have the same construction. There is also the whole society has high standard for building performance. And when we reduce the energy, we of course have improved the building envelope when we have made a renovation. But we have also had good help from the district heating. So we installed a lot of heat pumps. We have installed better windows with triple glazing. And there has been a low rate of new construction. That fact means that it has been important with the renovation work for the whole construction market. And it's also been of big help to have this network in Bebo and Belok to share experiences through different companies. And they have also made a market development of solutions for improved energy of the building envelope. Yeah, and the next and last slide. What I can see from our point of view is needed and important to continue with and to improve is to settle cooperation between politics, government, and construction sector. The renovation work is not just market-driven. The benefits do also exist for the society. And there's a big need of financial solutions since all renovation measures in these areas are not always economically justified. There's a motive for the government to help with to find financing. And we must also find a rational solution for refurbishment, be willing to share experience, and also increase the perform of the deep renovation of the building stock. And there is also a big need for more information to the whole public about the goals and how to reach the goals. And that was the last point for me. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Connie, and thank you to each of the other panelists for your presentations. And at this point, we are going to turn back to Jens Lausten, who will be addressing some questions to the panelists. So Jens, whenever you're ready. Oh, and Jens, you're still muted in case. Jens, are you there? You're still on mute.
Hello?
Yes. Well?
Yeah? I didn't, shall I say something or? No?
Oh, is it, hold on, we're trying to get Jens on the line. He's still on mute. Jens, if you can hear us, could you unmute your phone and do you have some questions for the panelists? All right, he might be having some technical difficulties, so I apologize for that. So we're going to go ahead and present some questions from the audience to the panelists. And so one of the first questions that I received was in regards to the drivers of the Grow Garden. How replicable is that project? Is it scalable? And what's the financing package? Could you talk about some more of the details regarding that?
Yeah, it's totally 16 houses, and they were really front runners. And the first house they did was quite expensive. It was almost at the level as they could have built a new house. But they have learned. They have learned at the time, and at this time they are much lower in cost. So, but there was an investment for the Brew Garden, the owner of the real estate. So they knew that it would be expensive, but they learned. So they know a lot more. But of course, the reduced energy consumption does not cover the expenses for the renovation, not at all.
Great, thank you, Connie.
Yes.
And let's check back in with Jens, see if he is able to figure out his audio. Jens, it's showing you as still muted. Are you able to unmute yourself? All right, very good. We'll move on to the next question then. And this question is just a general one regarding the global, the GBPN. Could you talk a little bit about how the GBPN integrates with the ISO?
I'm not quite sure about that one. I think Jens would be a good person to answer this. Can we hold that back until we find out where he is?
Yes, we definitely.
I can actually ask Lindsey a question. I know that we were quite interested in finding out sort of more about collaboration and hold on, if you just can just give me a second. Okay, so maybe what are the sort of drivers? Why do you feel that New York are doing better than other states in the U.S.? Because I think that's I think a lot of the states in the U.S. can learn from New York State. So what kind of advice would you give to other states in the U.S. that are looking to follow your path, your lead?
Well, I think especially on the residential sector, we've had a lot of success in working with organizations that have missions that are different from ours, but that are aligned with what we're trying to do, to collaborate with them in order to further the reach of our energy efficiency programs. You know, one of the examples of that, especially on the multifamily side, you know, we've collaborated with state and city agencies to fund and support affordable housing that's being built and continued to be managed and maintained throughout the state, and you know, certainly in large chunks in the city as well. And we've really collaborated with them, you know, on the new construction side. They've basically agreed to kind of require almost people who are getting financial assistance from the state to construct affordable housing to participate in our programs and make sure that that housing is energy efficient. And, you know, on the existing building side, to make sure that when affordable housing buildings that are getting financial support from the federal government or from state or city governments, that when they're doing major renovations or when they're changing hands, they're going through an energy efficiency renovation process. And I think it's finding opportunities like that where missions are aligned, where, you know, they want to build affordable housing or maintain affordable housing. We want energy efficiency. Energy efficient housing is more affordable to the residents that live there, and finding those types of connections can be really meaningful to further advance both policy agendas.
I'm muted. That's great.
Nope,
and I think I have another question, maybe. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Hi, Sophie. Sorry, when your computer is providing feedback and echo, so when you're not speaking, you just have to make sure to mute yourself. I did receive a few questions from the audience. I'd like to go ahead and present those to the panelists at this point. And so the next question that I had states that one of the panelists mentioned that the subsidies have been cut significantly. So according to your observations, what is more effective to promote renovation? Is it taxes or subsidies?
Can you repeat once more the last sentence?
Yes, definitely. In your observations, what has been more effective to promote renovations, taxes or subsidies?
What has been motivating?
What's
renovation? It's the big problem as we have in Sweden. The owner of the real estate, they don't have the benefits. That's for getting more employment, for getting secured areas, and so on. They just give the benefits of the lower energy consumption, and maybe if they raise the standard, they can take higher rents. But it's not enough. No, it's not enough. So you have some way. have to calculate and take care of the social benefits. Otherwise, we don't have any renovation work done. It has to be taken into consideration. You need some incentives, especially for the multifamily houses. There's another situation for single-family houses. At least in Sweden, the houses is owned by the owner has the benefits from the whole housing project. So there's a big difference between the single-family houses and multifamily houses. And in Sweden, the multifamily houses are heated by district heating. Then a quite small area. The average area is 70 square meters for in an apartment in a multifamily house. It's not so much to save by if you use district heating. So you have to have other aspects involved if you should start a renovation work. It's a different in the single-family houses. There's other drivers, driving aspects involved in single-family houses.
And Sophie, just so you know, we took you off mute, and I see that you're self-muted. So if you wanted to add to any of the comments, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead. Sorry, Connie, did you have another comment to make? Great, we'll move on to the next question then.
Yeah.
One of our attendees asked about, they heard about new policy packages for building energy renovation, so that's similar to the topic we were just discussing. Could you talk a little bit more about these new packages? Or have you heard anything regarding them? Specifically,
well, in Europe we have
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Okay, so in Europe we have the European Commission has actually set a policy for all member states to have sort of defined a renovation roadmap, which would then sort of feed into a policy package. We at the GBPN have defined what we would call a state-of-the-art policy package should be, and so that's. I mean, I'm not really sure what you mean by that question, but for us, a policy package is different policy elements working together to help to sort of upscale and yes, so we found that Germany there are many regions in Europe and some in the States who have sort of defined policies to work together, and that's what we call a policy package.
Great, thank you, Sophie. And the attendee did provide more detail in regards to their question after I asked it. They were wondering specifically about new policy packages in Southeast Asia or in Singapore that they heard about. Do you have anything to comment on that, or should I move on to the next question?
Unmuted. Yeah, I think there's some. Singapore are starting to build on their policy packages, and there's a state in China that are also working on this as well. So there's definitely movement in Southeast Asia, but I can't tell you much more about it.
All right. And so the next question that I received is, what is the most subscribed financial assistance in New York and why? So this is for Lindsey.
So I'm not sure that I fully understand the question. I guess if I'm going to interpret it, I would guess you're asking what the most popular programs that we run that offer financial assistance for renovations would be. And I would say that we don't offer a huge variety of programs. We usually offer, for each different sector, so residential versus multifamily, we offer each of those sectors programs that address whole building renovations. And we've had a lot of success with those programs. On the residential side, I think we've served about 60,000 different single-family or 1 to 4 unit homes. On the multifamily side, at this point, we've touched about 160,000 different units of multifamily housing with our comprehensive programs. But certainly, we have utilities offering kind of rebate structure programs for, one-off energy efficiency measures. And then NYSERDA tends to offer comprehensive programs that involve bringing a technical expert into your home or into your multifamily building to do an energy audit and develop a comprehensive package for doing significant energy efficiency reductions. Certainly, those comprehensive projects are much more beneficial, but they also are obviously much more challenging to get people to participate in because it involves a lot of time commitment and a lot of capital outlay from their perspective, even with the incentives that are provided to them. But we try and kind of offer a different suite of programs to address the needs of different types of customers. I hope that in some way, shape, or form answers the question.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Lindsey. And just looking through the questions, that is, I did have another question regarding the GBPN, but we have lost the end Lausten, so I'll move ahead and I'll email that one along so that it can be covered. And then the GBPN also works in China and India. What are the lessons from either New York or Sweden that can be, what are the main lessons that you think could be applied to those other regions? So that the regions they refer to are China and India.
Is this a question for, I don't quite understand if this is a question for Sophie or for Connie and I.
Yeah, it was presented generally. Sophie, I think they do refer to the GBPN. If you could address that question, and you are self-muted right now.
I could,
okay, sorry about that.
I should quickly say that. Yeah, I could definitely quickly say that I think it's been tremendous in New York State and in a lot of the United States that having these ratepayer surcharges that utilities are implementing that are actually generating funds to finance these energy efficiency programs, because having some sort of funding on the table either to provide incentives or technical assistance and to support outreach and all different types of strategies to get clean energy implemented, it really is important to have a dedicated source of funding to support that. And I think that that has been a tremendous help in the United States, in New York specifically. And so finding some way to get that type of revenue source, is a huge asset.
Great. Thank you very much.
I'd like to add something to that, if I can. I'd like to add something to that. I think that also because there are some regions or jurisdictions in China and India who don't necessarily have the funding at present to really work on strategies. So I think initially they need to have a sort of umbrella target or the government actually has to initially have the will to want to renovate. So they should have some national targets set for renovation, but then also, and it might not necessarily require too much funding, is feed down sort of learning resources into different regional sectors in a specific region, so that they have accessibility to education modules and sort of building regulations to know how a building should actually be built, I think is the fundamental part for a region sort of starting to build a renovation strategy.
Great, thank you both. And so with that, we are approaching the end of the webinar, and also that was all the questions that I received from the audience at this point. So I'd like to again just thank the panelists for the presentations and the discussion afterwards. And now I'd like to ask our audience to take a quick minute to answer a survey on the webinar that you viewed today. We just have 3 short questions for you to answer that you can answer directly through the GoToWebinar platform. Heather, if you could go ahead and display that first question. Great, and the next question. The webinar's presenters were effective. And then the final question, Heather. Now, overall, the webinar met my expectations. Great. And thank you for answering our survey. And on behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I would just like to send a hearty thank you to our panelists and also the attendees for participating in today's webinar. Very much appreciate your time, and I do invite you to check the Solutions Center website over the next few weeks if you'd like to view the slides again or listen to a recording of today's presentation, as well as any previously held webinars. And I'd also like to invite you to join the next webinar in this series, which will be taking place in June, and we will be sending out announcements for that prior to the webinar. And we also invite you to inform your colleagues and those in your networks about the Solutions Center resources and services, including the no-cost policy support. And we hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and hope to see you again at future Clean Energy Solutions Center events. And this concludes our webinar.